Hi, my name is Paul Grogan, and in this video I'm going to be teaching you how to play Inventions, Evolution of Ideas. Since the dawn of time, humans have sought new ideas and continued to develop them over the ages. Each invention is an evolutionary step forward. Inventions is a game for 1 to 4 players and follows humanity's most noteworthy innovations, placing the power of these technological developments in your hands as you evolve your society from the Stone Age through to the Computer Age. During the game, each society will have ideas which they will present to the world. These ideas will then be invented, innovated upon, and then shared. You will have Eureka moments where you advance to a new milestone technology, making new inventions possible and moving your society ahead of the times. And you will be advancing your own society by building up your economy, culture and technology. A big thank you to Eagle Griffin Games for sponsoring this video, but I also rely on the financial support of my Patreon campaign to keep the channel going. So if you want to support me directly, you can do so by becoming one of my supporters at patreon.com/gamingrules. In this video, I'm going to be using the components from the basic game. If you have any add-ons, your game will look slightly different. Place the main board in the middle of the playing area. Place Chronos on the leftmost space of the Era track. This is the timer for the game. Take the milestone tiles and separate them according to their letter. Place the A tiles at random on the 4 spaces of the Common Knowledge display. The Common display shows the milestones which all players have access to at the start of the game. Place the B milestones at random on the 4 spaces of the Private display. Note that these spaces are colour-coded, one for each player. You will always use all of the spaces, even if playing with fewer than 4 players. Place the C milestones next to the board. This is the Eureka display. And place the other tiles face down in stacks nearby. In each region, place a sage on the appropriate space. Take the knowledge tiles and place 1 at random in each region, this side up. Take the specialist tiles and place 1 at random in each region, 3 at the top of the board and 4 at the bottom. Separate the idea/invention cards into stacks based on their era number. From the era 2 cards, take the 5 with the letter A. The regions with these 2 specialist tiles don't start with an idea card, but in each other region, place a random idea card on the appropriate space. Shuffle the era 6 cards and place them idea side up next to the board. Then repeat this process with the era 5 cards, then era 4, and then era 3, so that you have one big stack. Separate the wealth tiles by letter and then take 1 of each letter. Randomly place these tiles, 1 per region, this side up like so. In a 2-player game, place 1 more tile of each letter on top of the previous one. In a 3-player game, add a 3rd tile to the A, B, C and D stacks. And in a 4-player game, add 1 more tile to every stack. In other words, for the A, B, C and D tiles there is 1 per player, and for the E, F and G tiles there are 2 tiles in 2 to 3 player games and 3 tiles in a 4-player game. Also note that all of the A tiles are the same, and the same is true of the B, C and D tiles, but the E, F and G tiles are all different. If playing with fewer than 4 players, choose the ones that you're using at random. Separate the economy tiles by number. When playing with 2 to 3 players, place 2 tiles of each number into the storage tray. If playing with 4 players, add an extra tile of each number. Do the exact same thing with the culture tiles and then the technology tiles. Each player chooses a colour and takes a society board and all of the components in that colour. Each player places their scoring marker on space 0 of the Ingenuity Points track. Scoring Ingenuity Points, or IP, is how you win the game. In this video, I'm going to refer to it as simply points. The player who most recently invented something places their turn order marker on the top space of the turn order track. If none of the players are inventors, just choose a start player at random. Then, in clockwise order, each other player places their turn order marker on the next space. Each player places their era marker on one of the spaces below the era 2 section of the era track. The order doesn't matter. On the influence track in the middle of the board, place each player's influence marker on space 1. Again, the order doesn't matter. On your society board, place 2 citizens in your academy. These are known as scholars. Place 1 citizen in the home space of your economy area. This is known as a trader. Place another citizen in the home space of your culture area. This is known as an artisan. And finally, place 1 citizen in the home space of your technology area. This is known as a thinker. Collectively, traders, artisans and thinkers are known as specialists. Your scholars act as wildcards and can be used as if they are any type of specialist. Place the rest of your citizens in a supply nearby. Take your influence tokens and set aside the one depicting +1 influence. Place the other 4 tokens on the matching spaces in the bottom right of your board. Place your 3 chain action tokens in the top left of your board here. And place your 3 pillars of time just above your board. Each player takes 3 economy tokens. Place one of them in the leftmost slot in the bottom right of your board, and the other 2 on the hexes depicting the economy symbol. Note that each of the society boards is slightly different, so your symbols might be in a different place. Take the Era 1 inventions, shuffle them and deal 2 to each player. Return any remaining to the box. Place the 2 inventions you were dealt to the left of your society board. These are the things that you've already invented before the game starts. On the main board, each player places one of their citizens onto the top space of the milestone corresponding to their player colour. This citizen is a diplomat. If playing with fewer than 4 players, leave the milestones from players not in the game empty, but the milestones stay on the board. Then take the 4 remaining Era 2 ideas and give them to the players based on their milestone. The player with agriculture gets irrigation, the player with cotton gets silk, and so on. Place your Era 2 idea card to the right of your society board. Ensure that you place it idea side up like this. Then each player in turn order draws the top card from the idea stack and places it idea side up in the other slot to the right of their board. These 2 cards are your current ideas, ready to be presented to the world. After everyone has taken their card from the top of the stack, lay out the next 3 cards one at a time like this. Sort the private goals into 3 decks based on their type. Shuffle each deck separately and deal 1 card from each deck to each player. These goals give you some kind of idea about the things that you might want to do during the game to score additional points at the end. Keep them secret from the other players. Each player takes 4 aspiration tiles and places them nearby. Give each player one of the player aid booklets and place the 2 action aids nearby. These are 2-sided and contain a summary of the different actions. Before the game properly starts, you play through a setup round, which represents the early Stone Age. In reverse turn order, starting with the player who is last on the turn order track, each player does the following. First, choose a region that has an idea card that hasn't already been chosen by another player, such as this one. Then, look at the specialist tile for that region. It depicts 1 or 2 specialists. Take that number of specialists from your society board and place them onto the tile. The type of specialist you use must match the type of idea. Here, for example, the wheel is a technology idea, so the specialists you place must be thinkers. And you might be thinking, but I only have 1 thinker, so how can I place 2? Well, remember earlier that I said that scholars were wildcards. You can always use a scholar instead of any type of specialist. So here you would remove 1 thinker and 1 scholar and place them on the tile. Then you gain the benefit depicted on the tile. Some of these are fairly easy, such as this one, which gains you 3 points. Others, however, allow you to immediately perform one of the actions in the game, and I'll explain those later in the video. Next, take your influence token, which you set aside earlier, and place it on the leftmost influence space in your chosen region. Normally, during the game, you would gain the points depicted on the space for placing your token there, but that doesn't happen during the setup round. Finally, place 1 citizen from your supply into the region on the map. After all players have done this, remove from the game any idea cards from regions that were not selected by players. And with setup complete, you're now ready to play. The game is played over 6 eras, going from the late Stone Age all the way through to the Computer Age. Era 1 only consists of 1 round. Eras 2 through 5 each consist of 3 rounds, and Era 6 is just final scoring. In each round, players, in turn order, will place one of their pillars onto one of the 10 action spaces in the assembly and perform the corresponding action. The type of pillar that you place and the restrictions on which spaces are available to you I'll explain in more detail later on. The top 4 actions cover the main theme of the game, which is all about ideas and inventions. First, a society will present an idea. In the setup round, which I explained earlier, each player has already presented an idea to the world, but that will happen many more times over the course of the game by performing the present an idea action. But an idea that is just an idea is of no use until it is invented, which is what this action is. Importantly though, it doesn't have to be the player who presented the idea who invents it. It could be somebody else. And sometimes another player, who must be different from the one who invented it, can innovate upon that invention, making it better. Ultimately though, whether innovated upon or not, the invention will be shared with the world, moving the society forward in the race for wealth. The other 6 actions in the game do a variety of things. These three all focus on the world map, bringing home specialists from a region, travelling around the world, learning more about new cultures, and gaining influence by having control of a region. Whereas these three actions all relate to the milestone tiles: sending a diplomat, recalling a diplomat, and having a Eureka moment, moving your society ahead of the times. Taking some of those actions will gain you progress tiles, which, once built onto your society board, will give you a variety of special abilities to help your society thrive. In addition to progress tiles, you can also gain and build wealth tiles, which reflect the advances of your society and contribute a lot to final scoring. And all the time you must keep an eye on your personal goals. At the end of the game, you will choose 2 of these to score. I'm going to be explaining the rules for the 4-player game in this video. For the 2 and 3-player game, refer to the rulebook for the changes, and for the solo game, refer to the separate, smaller rulebook for the full details. There are a total of 13 rounds in the game, split over the 5 eras. In each round of the game, except for the first, Chronos advances 1 step on the era track. Then, in turn order, as determined by the order of the markers here, each player takes a turn. On your turn, you place a pillar into the assembly and perform your chosen action. In addition, players may have the opportunity to perform 1 or more chain actions by using the chain action tokens they have available. At the end of each era, except for the 5th, there is an end of era procedure to follow, as depicted on the era track. When Chronos moves to the last space, the game enters the computer age, at which point you perform final scoring. On your turn, you perform 4 steps which are summarised on your society board. First, you prepare your chain action tokens. Then, you perform actions. Next, any aspirations you have become progress. And finally, you advance your society by building progress. In step 1, you determine how many chain action tokens you have available to you this turn. The more influence you have, the more chain actions you have. In the first round of the game, your token will be in this section, so you have 1 chain action token for this turn. Later in the game, as your influence increases, you may have 2 or even 3 chain action tokens available to you. Move the appropriate number of tokens from here to here, ready for you to use during step 2 of your turn. After step 2, whether you have used them or not, return them back to the space on the left. I'll explain exactly how you use these tokens later on. Step 2 is the main part of your turn in which you will perform 1 or more actions. In the first round of the game, you will place your epoch pillar, which is the big one, and you can place it on any of the 10 possible actions. If you place your pillar in the same action space as another player's epoch pillar, that player gains 1 influence. And if there are multiple other players with epoch pillars on your chosen space, they each gain 1 influence. Whenever you gain influence, move your token 1 space up on the influence track. Eras 2 to 5 consist of 3 rounds each, and if you look carefully, you'll see that the first 2 spaces depict a wheel and the third one depicts a pillar. This indicates that in the first 2 rounds of each of those eras, players place their season pillars, the small ones, and in the third round of each of those eras, they move their epoch pillar. So, in round 1 of the game, each player will place their epoch pillar. Then, in the first round of Era 2, each player on their turn places a season pillar. And if you place your season pillar on the same space as another player's epoch pillar, that player gains 1 influence. In the second round of Era 2, each player will place their second season pillar. And then in the last round of Era 2, players move their epoch pillar to a new space. At the end of an era, the season pillars are removed. Epoch pillars are never removed, they are only moved around. Okay, so I've said that in the first round of the game you can place your epoch pillar anywhere, but there are restrictions on where you can place your season pillars once you get to Era 2. The assembly is divided into 5 forums. When you place a pillar, it cannot be in the same forum as any of your other pillars. So in the first round of Era 2, if your epoch pillar was here, you could not place your season pillar on either of these 2 spaces. Let's say you place it here. Which means in the second round of Era 2, when you place your second season pillar, you cannot place it on any of these 4 action spaces. And remember, if another player has an epoch pillar in the space you choose, they gain 1 influence. In the final round of Era 2, players will move their epoch pillar. You must move your epoch pillar to a different forum, and it cannot be on an action space in a forum containing one of your season pillars. For example, you are the blue player, and this is the situation on your turn in the last round of Era 2. The only spaces where you can move your epoch pillar to are these ones. And as usual, other players gain influence if they have an epoch pillar on the space that you move your pillar to. After placing or moving your pillar, you must then carry out your chosen action. If and only if you cannot perform the action that you chose, you must choose a different action. And if you cannot do any of the actions, you simply gain one influence. This should be avoided at all costs. All good inventions start with an idea, and the first action I want to explain is present an idea, something that players have already done during the setup round. The iconography here shows the 3 steps of this action. First, you take one of the ideas from the right side of your society board and place it in a region that currently has an empty slot. Next, place the depicted number of specialists matching the type of idea from your society board onto the specialist tile. To present the idea of glass, you need to place thinkers because glass is a technology idea. You then gain the bonus depicted on the specialist tile. Remember that scholars can be used as any type of specialist. So here you only have one thinker, so you use that and a scholar. Some bonuses from specialist tiles allow you to perform another action, such as this one, which allows you to perform another present an idea action. In this case, you do that now, but note that this is not a chain action. I'll come to those later. At the end of step 2 of your turn, you then replace your missing idea. If you have somehow managed to present twice on your turn, you will have 2 empty slots and you refill both of them. For each missing idea, select a new one from the display, which is the 3 cards here and also the one on top of the deck. Take it and place it in your empty slot. Then, if you took one of the 3 cards, slide cards to the right to fill any gaps and then place the top card from the deck in the empty space. Okay, so somebody, somewhere, which may have been you, has had an idea and presented it to the world, but someone needs to turn that idea into reality, and you do that with the invent action, advancing the technology of your society. The 4 steps of this action are shown here. First, you choose any idea card on the board that has previously been presented. It may be one of your ideas or someone else's, but you can only choose an idea which shows a milestone that you have access to. As mentioned in setup, all players have access to any milestone in the common display. Later in the game, some of these milestones will have been pushed off the board. These are still classed as in the common display. You also have access to the milestone in the space matching your player colour, even if you have removed the Diplomat from the tile. And you have access to another player's milestone if you have a Diplomat on the tile. And finally, you also have access to an opponent's milestone if it's from an era earlier than the current one. For example, the mining milestone is in the private display. It is from era B, which corresponds to era 2. If the game is currently in era 3 or higher, indicated by the position of Chronos, then every player has access to that milestone. Thematically, milestones represent big advances in technology that allows for the invention of new ideas. For example, you cannot learn to make steel without the knowledge of how to smelt iron. Once you have chosen an idea on the board that has a milestone that you have access to, the next step is to gain a technological aspiration. You do this by placing one of your aspiration tiles in the leftmost empty slot at the bottom of your board, rotated so that the technology symbol is at the top. At the end of your turn, you will exchange this for an actual technology tile, but for now, just leave it there. I'll explain exchanging it later on. Step 3 of inventing is to move a specialist of the type matching the idea from your society board to the invent space, just to the right of the card. The domestication of the horse is an economic idea, so you need to place a trader. And as usual, if you don't have a specialist of the required type, you can place a scholar instead. If the idea depicts this icon, you must also exhaust a specialist of the corresponding type. Inventing glass is hard work. You need to place a thinker here, and then you also need to exhaust another thinker. Exhausting a specialist means moving one from the home section to the exhausted section below and laying them down. An exhausted specialist is unavailable for use. They will recover at the end of each era except for era 1. If you need to exhaust a specialist and don't have any of that type, you can use a scholar, moving it from your academy to the exhausted section of the type of specialist you need. That citizen is no longer a scholar. They have found their true calling and are now a specialist instead. At the end of the era, they will unexhaust and move to the home section for their new type. Finally, flip the idea card to the other side. It is now an invention. Innovating on an existing invention can be very rewarding. Societies that innovate encourage more people to join them. Remember, the flow of the game is that ideas are presented, invented, and then shared. Innovating an idea happens between inventing and sharing and is optional. Here, the purple player is innovating. The steps to follow are depicted on the action space. First, choose an invention on the board that you are eligible to innovate. You cannot innovate on an idea. It has to have already been invented first. So here, glass cannot be innovated upon, but domestication of the horse could. You also cannot innovate upon something that you invented yourself, although if you presented it and somebody else invented it, then you can innovate on it. The first step of innovating is to move an available specialist matching the type of the invention to the Innovate space to the bottom right. Then you gain a new specialist of the same type as you just used to innovate. Take one from your supply and place them in the corresponding home section on your board. The final step of innovating is that you get to perform a chain action, represented by the pink shaded section here. You can only perform a chain action if you have a chain action token available. You place the token here and then perform the action indicated on the card. In this case, you would get to perform the travel action. Sharing an invention is the last of the 4 core actions of the game to explain. Inventions only become useful to society if they are shared with the world. At that point, the societies who share them can generate great wealth. You can share any invention on the board that you were involved in, either as the presenter, the inventor, or the innovator. Here, either the orange, blue, or purple players could share this invention. The card must have already been invented before it can be shared, but remember, they do not need to have been innovated upon. That is optional. This action consists of the 4 steps as shown here. First, the presenter of the original idea moves their specialists from the specialist tile into the region itself on the map. For each citizen moved, that player gains a number of points equal to the era on the invention. So here, orange gains 2 points. Next, the inventor moves their citizen into the region on the map and then takes the invention card, which they place to the left of their society board. Then, the innovator, if any, moves their citizen to the map. As a reward, they take a citizen from their supply and place it into the same region. Finally, the player who took this action either takes the wealth tile from the region, placing it on the leftmost empty slot of their display, or, instead of taking the wealth tile, places one of their aspiration tiles in the slot, rotated so that the question mark is standing upright. An aspiration tile set in this way is wild and can be exchanged later in your turn for any of the 3 types of progress tiles. And note that you can only have 1 wealth tile of each letter. So if you end up sharing an invention from the same region twice during the game, you cannot choose the wealth tile again. You must choose a wild aspiration instead. And you are also limited to 4 tiles in your display. If they are all full when you share an invention, you may choose to replace an aspiration tile in your display with the new tile that you take. If you choose not to do this, you do not take a new tile. The Call Specialist action allows you to bring citizens back home from one of the regions on the map and advance your society's economy. The 3 steps of the action are depicted on the action space. First, you place an aspiration tile in the leftmost empty slot, rotated so that the economy symbol is at the top. Next, choose a region on the map where you have citizens and return 1 or more of them back home. Any citizens you have in the region display remain there. You only return the ones actually on the map. When a citizen returns home, you need to determine which type of citizen it is so that you know where to place it on your board. If there is a card in the corresponding region display, the type of that card determines the speciality of the citizen. So here, the card in South America is cultural. Therefore, any citizens that come home from this region are artisans. If there is no card in the region, you look at the rightmost card in the idea display. That determines the type of citizen you get. Once the type of citizen has been determined, place the returning citizens into the corresponding home section. Finally, you get to perform a chain action from one of your inventions to the left of your board. To do this, place one of your available chain action tokens onto the card and then carry out that action. Influential societies are stronger and more powerful. The Gain Influence action allows you to gain points and influence by controlling a region. The 4 steps of the action are depicted on the action space. First, choose a region on the map where you have more citizens than any other player and you do not currently have an influence token in the region. Then, choose one of your influence tokens to place on the board. As well as needing to have the most citizens in the region, the number of citizens you have must be equal to or higher than depicted next to the token. For example, if you had 3 citizens in this region, you could only choose to place this one or this one, but not this one or this one. Let's say you choose this one, depicting the present action. You must then return the required number of citizens, in this case 2, from the region back home. Returning citizens back home works in the same way as I described in the previous action. Their type is determined by the card in the region, and if there is no card in the region, then it's the rightmost card in the display. Next, you gain the points shown on the leftmost empty space of the region and place your influence token on that space. You then gain 1 influence for each of your face-up influence tokens on the map. Here, for example, you would gain 2 influence, moving your marker 2 spaces up on the influence track. If you had any face-down tokens, they don't provide you with any influence. And if you're wondering how influence tokens get flipped face down, well, that's the very next thing that I'm going to explain. The last step of this action is that you get to perform the chain action on any one of your face-up influence tokens in any region. This could be the one that you've just placed or any of your other face-up tokens. To do this, you must have a chain action token available, which you place next to the influence token, perform the chain action, and then flip the token face down. The travel action improves your society's culture and allows you to learn from wise sages around the world. The 3 steps of the action are depicted on the action space. First, place an aspiration tile on the leftmost empty slot of your display, rotated so that the culture symbol is at the top. Next, move one of your citizens on the map to an adjacent region, following the blue lines. Note that there is a blue line connecting Asia and North America. The world is, after all, round. If you move to a region with a sage and you have an available chain action token, you may place that token next to the knowledge tile. You then, as a chain action, perform the action on the knowledge tile and then flip the tile over. If, however, the tile had already been flipped over, then instead of performing the action, you gain 2 points for each knowledge tile on the board that is showing its 2-point side. So here you would gain 6 points. Then you flip all of those tiles back to the side showing the action. Finally, in either case, you take the sage and place them in your academy on your board. I'll explain what they do later on. And just to clarify, you can perform the travel action and move to a region without a sage, just to gain a cultural aspiration. If you do move to a region with the sage, then in order to take that sage, you must have a chain action token available. New technological milestones allow your society to move ahead of the times. This is represented by the Eureka action. In order to perform this action, the milestones in the Eureka display must be from an era later than your private milestone. So if you were the first player to perform this action and you do it during Era 2, the milestones in the display will be from Era C, and your private milestone is from Era B, so that's okay. Taking this action will move one of the milestones from the Eureka display to be your new private milestone, which means that you cannot perform this action again until the Eureka display is refreshed, which only happens at the end of an era. The 3 steps of the action are depicted on the action space. First, move the bottommost milestone from the common display to an area beside the board. As mentioned earlier, any milestones pushed off the board like this are still classed as being in the common display, and all players have access to them. If there were any citizens on the tile that was pushed off, those are returned to the players as scholars, placed into their academy. And at this point in the video, I just wanted to let you know that you are limited on the number of scholars that you can have. As depicted here, the era of your current milestone is your limit. So, at the start of the game, your current milestone is from Era 2, meaning that you can have a maximum of 2 scholars. If you are at your limit and would gain another scholar, return the new scholar to your supply instead. Note, however, that if you are the one performing this action, then you can use the era number of the milestone that you are about to take as your new limit. So if you are about to take an Era 3 milestone, your limit on scholars is 3. Next, move your current private milestone to the common display, inserted above all other milestones of the same era or lower. So the first time in the game that this is done, you would slide down the other milestones and then put yours at the top. Any diplomats on the tile are moved with it. Later in the game, it could happen that there is already a milestone in the common display with a higher era than the one that you are inserting. Here, for example, yellow is performing the Eureka action and currently has a milestone from Era B. However, there is already an Era C milestone in the common display. In this case, move the one at the bottom off the board, slide the others down, but insert your milestone below any milestone of a higher era. And it could even happen that your current private milestone is from an era earlier than even the bottom milestone in the common display. Here, for example, purple is very behind the times, still on a B milestone, and all of the milestones in the common display are from era C. In this case, move your milestone straight to the discards by the side of the board. Milestones by the side of the board can be splayed so that they take up less space. Just make sure that all of the names are still visible. The next step of this action is to choose a new milestone from the Eureka display and place it in your private milestone space. Place a citizen from your supply onto the left side of the milestone as a new diplomat. Then take a note of the era of your new milestone and advance your era marker to an empty space below that era, immediately gaining the benefit of your chosen space. All of these icons are explained on the back page of the rulebook. The exception to this is the change turn order space. There is no immediate benefit of placing your marker on this space, but it will be relevant at the end of an era. And before going on, I'd like to just take a moment to talk about the era track. As mentioned earlier, Chronos tracks the passage of time and moves along the era track as the game progresses. The era that Chronos is in is the current era. As just described, taking the Eureka action is what moves your era marker forward. If your marker is in an era to the left of Chronos, your society is said to be behind the times. And if your marker is in an era to the right of Chronos, then your society is said to be ahead of the times. The Send Diplomat action allows you to gain access to another society's milestone or gain the benefit of a common milestone. The two steps of the action are depicted on the action space. First, move any available specialist or scholar from your society board to a milestone on the board which has an available space. You can send a diplomat to a milestone in the common display or one of the private milestones. You cannot, however, have two diplomats on the same milestone. If you place a diplomat on another player's milestone, which is from a later era than your current milestone, that player gains 1 influence. So here, if you, as blue, placed a diplomat on sailing, which is an era 3 milestone, and your milestone was from era 2, then orange would gain 1 influence. Next, you gain the benefit depicted on the milestone, which sometimes will allow you to perform an action. Note, however, that this is not a chain action, meaning that you just perform the action. The Call Diplomat action allows you to return one of your diplomats back home for one final benefit. The two steps of this action are depicted on the action space. First, choose a milestone with your diplomat on it and return that citizen back home as a scholar. Remember that you are limited on the number of scholars based on your current era. Then, gain the benefit of the milestone that your diplomat just left. Note that you are allowed to remove your diplomat from your own private milestone. If you do, you still have access to that milestone for the purposes of inventing. I've already covered chain actions briefly, but I wanted to just take a moment to go over them again. At the very start of your turn, the position of your marker on the influence track determines how many chain action tokens you have available for you that turn. 0, 1, 2 or 3. For example, at the start of your turn you have 5 influence. This gives you 2 chain action tokens for that turn. So you move 2 of your tokens to here. And this means that during your turn you may perform up to 2 chain actions, 1 for each token. At the end of your turn, the tokens are returned to here, whether you use them or not. A possible chain action is highlighted with a pink background and the chain symbol. You can only perform a chain action if you have an available chain action token, and doing so places that token next to the action that you're performing. Performing a chain action is identical to performing a regular action. It's just that you're limited on how many chain actions you can do on your turn. For example, you place your pillar on the Innovate action and perform it as your main action for the turn. You decide to innovate the invention of glass, an idea initially presented by you but invented by the yellow player. Doing so allows you to perform the chain action depicted here, which is to call specialists. And importantly, with chain actions, you don't move your pillar to the action, you just follow the steps of it. After gaining an economy aspiration and returning citizens back to your board, you get to perform the chain action on one of your invention cards. So, as long as you still have a chain action token available, you can place it here, for example, and perform the Send Diplomat action. And note that you can still perform the action even if one of your pillars is on the action space. You send a diplomat to the internal combustion milestone, gaining the benefit of the tile, which is to perform the Innovate action again. And since this benefit doesn't depict the chain symbol, doing it is not a chain action, you just do it. Finally, you perform your second innovation of the turn and decide to improve on the windmill invention. However, at this point, you are out of chain actions, so you cannot perform the Eureka action shown here. Step 2 of your turn is now complete. Don't forget to return your chain action tokens to your board at the end of your turn. Now that I've been through all of the actions, it's time to go back to the next thing that you do on your turn after performing actions. During your turn, you may have gained one or more aspiration tiles. It's possible to gain an aspiration tile even if your display is full. You simply place the tile below your player board. At the end of step 2 of your turn, you decide which ones to keep. Steps 3 and 4 of your turn can actually be carried out while the next player takes their turn. In step 3 of your turn, you now convert those aspirations into progress tiles. If the tile is rotated like this, you replace it with an economic tile. If the tile is rotated like this, you replace it with a culture tile. And if the tile is rotated like this, you replace it with a technology tile. If the tile is rotated like this, you replace it with any type of progress tile. Take a tile of the corresponding type from the tray and replace the aspiration tile with it. Place the aspiration tile back in your supply. Similar to the wealth tiles that I mentioned earlier, you can only have one copy of each progress tile. The final step of your turn is step 4, where you move progress and wealth tiles onto your progress map, which is an abstract representation of your society as a whole. This step is optional. You do not have to do it if you don't want to. And early in the game, if you only have 1 or 2 tiles, you may want to wait until you have more. And that is because the cost of moving the tiles to your progress map decreases the more tiles you have. If you only have 1 tile, the cost is 3 influence. If you have 2 tiles, the cost is 2 influence. If you have 3 tiles, the cost is only 1 influence, and if you have 4 tiles, it's free. However, don't get too excited when you manage to collect all 4 tiles because you are limited on how many you can build each turn. The number of tiles you can build is equal to your current era minus 1, as shown here. So if you were in era 3, for example, you could only build 2 tiles. It doesn't matter what era the game is in, only what era you are in. So one advantage of being ahead of the times is the ability to build more progress tiles. The influence cost to build tiles is just a one-off cost, not for each tile you build. You can build any of the tiles in your display. You do not have to do them in order. To build a tile, take it from your display and choose any empty space on your progress map to move it to. It does not need to be placed next to another tile. You immediately gain the benefit of the space that you choose. So if you chose this space, you would gain a new artisan, and then place the tile on the space. In addition to the influence cost allowing you to build, you must also exhaust a certain number of specialists. Importantly though, that cost is paid after you gain the benefit of the space. So if the benefit provides you with any specialists, you can use them to help pay for the placement of the tile. These spaces gain a new specialist of the type indicated on the space, whereas these 2 spaces give you a new scholar. These 2 spaces grant you another economy token, which you move to the bottom right of your board. This space gives you 1 influence. And these 2 spaces give you a discount of 2 citizens on the tile that you place there. After placing the tile, you must then exhaust a certain number of citizens. If you cannot do so, you cannot build the tile. To build a progress tile, either economy, culture or technology, you must exhaust specialists of the appropriate type by moving them from the home section to the section below and laying them on their side. The base cost to build a tile is 1 specialist plus another 1 for each tile adjacent to the one that you have just placed. For example, to build this technology tile here will require you to exhaust 3 thinkers, 1 for the tile itself and 2 more because it's next to 2 other tiles. However, you gain a discount on this equal to the number of inventions you have of the matching type. Here you have 2 technological inventions, so you get a discount of 2 on every technology tile that you build. Thematically, this represents that the more you have invented of the appropriate type, the more easily you can progress. And note that the discount is only on how many citizens you exhaust. It doesn't change the initial influence cost to be able to build. And remember, if you don't have enough specialists, you can use a scholar instead, moving them from your academy to the exhausted area of the type that you need. Wealth tiles are more expensive. The base cost is 2 specialists, plus another 1 for each tile that is adjacent. Placing 1 here, for example, would cost a total of 3. A base cost of 2, plus 1 for each adjacent tile, and then minus 2 for the space bonus. And because wealth tiles are not associated with any specific type of invention, you don't get any discount on them for your previous inventions. But you can pay the cost of a wealth tile with any mix of specialists. So here you can just about afford it, exhausting the 2 artisans and then exhausting the scholar, choosing any of the 3 types. After you have built your tiles, slide any remaining ones to the left to fill any gaps. So now that I've explained how you gain these tiles and how you build them, what do they actually do? Well, the first thing to mention is that all of the tiles are fully explained in your player aid booklet, so be sure to check that for the specific details of each tile. But I will cover how each type of tile works now. First, the culture tiles. As soon as these are built, they have a permanent ability which is active for the rest of the game. Each one of them improves the action depicted on the tile. For example, this one, whenever you travel, you can actually travel to anywhere in the world, not just an adjacent region. The economy tiles work in a different way. They have an ability, but you must activate them by placing one of your available economy tokens onto the tile. You only start the game with 1 economy token, but you can gain more by building any type of tile onto a space with a token, unlocking that token for use later on. Economy tokens are only returned back to the bottom right of your board at the end of an era, which means that each economy tile can only be used once per era. Technology tiles are a bit more complex. At the end of step 2 of your turn, after performing all of your other actions, if one of the actions you performed during your turn is depicted on the tile, you may spend 1 influence and flip the tile over to perform the other action shown on the tile, as long as you have an available chain action token. For example, during your turn, if you have this tile and you performed the share an invention action, you could spend 1 influence to perform the travel action, or vice versa. Using a technology tile flips the tile over and you place the chain action token on it. And there's no way to flip a technology tile back. In other words, each of them may only be used once during the game, and you can only use 1 technology tile a turn in this way. Technology tile number 4 works slightly different. It is used before taking your main action to allow you to place your pillar in a forum where you already have one. The wealth tiles are for end of game scoring. They do nothing during the game, but you're going to need these at the end of the game to increase your score. Each tile scores based on the criteria depicted on the tile. This one, for example, scores 3 points for each economy tile in contiguous groups that are connected to the wealth tile. So here you would score 12 points. This economy tile does not score as it's not connected to the wealth tile. At the end of the first era, which is after all players have taken a turn placing their epoch pillar, there are 2 steps to perform, as indicated here. First, you adjust the turn order, but only if a player moved their era marker to this space, which they could only do by performing the Eureka action and choosing the turn order space. If nobody did, turn order stays the same, but if they did, that player chooses where they want to go in turn order and the other markers are shifted to maintain their relative position. Let's say that orange wants to go first. Next, you adjust the influence track. Any player whose marker is on the bottom space gains 1 influence, putting them back at 1. Anyone who is on spaces 4 to 7 loses 1 influence, and anyone who's on spaces 8 to 10 loses 2 influence. And you might be thinking, how is it possible to get to 8 influence on your first turn of the game? Well, you can't, but there is a reason why I've explained it like that. Because at the end of eras 2, 3 and 4, you move Chronos to the space between eras and perform all of the steps shown here. And the first 2 of these steps I've already mentioned. Turn order changes only if at least 1 player is on one of the change turn order spaces. So here, orange is still the only player on one of these spaces, so they can choose where they go in turn order again. But here, purple is also on a change turn order space, and it's the rightmost marker on a change turn order space that decides. Note though that if purple is ahead of orange, but not on a change turn order space, then it's orange who can change the turn order. Step 2 is to adjust influence, as I mentioned earlier. Step 3 is the recovery of all exhausted specialists. Simply move them from the exhausted section to the home section above and stand them upright. In step 4, players take back their season pillars from the board. Make sure that you leave your epoch pillar where it is. Then, for each sage that you have, you gain a scholar to your academy, as long as you are not already at your limit. If you were at your limit, do not gain a scholar. And then all sages are returned to the map, placing them on the empty sage spaces. Each player also returns any economy tokens placed on progress tiles back to the bottom right of their board. Those economy tiles can be used again in the next era. In step 5, you refresh the milestones. First, move all milestone tiles that are still in the Eureka display into the common display, inserting them in the same way as I mentioned earlier. Any tile pushed off the bottom is placed with the others, then add the milestones for the next era to the Eureka display. Some eras have 3 new milestones, others have 4. In 2 or 3 player games there is a special rule that applies before refreshing the milestones. Check the rulebook for full details. Step 6 relates to the ideas display. Remove any cards from the era that you just left from the game. So if you were moving from era 3 to 4 and the idea of coins was still in the display, remove it from the game. Then slide any remaining idea cards to the right and replenish any empty spaces with cards from the deck. Each player in turn order also removes from the game any ideas that they have from the era that you just left. And for each idea you remove, take a new one from the display, which can be one of these 3 cards or one from the top of the deck. And as usual, if you take one of the 3, slide down and replenish from the deck. At the end of Era 5, you skip performing the change of era steps and instead move Chronos to the last space and perform final scoring. First, each player gains points based on the position of their marker on the influence track. 1 point if you have 1 to 3 influence, 5 points if you have 4 to 7 influence, and 10 points if you have 8 to 10 influence. Then each player scores for their wealth tiles on their progress map. And finally, each player chooses 2 of their final goal cards to score. I haven't really mentioned the final goal cards much, so let's do that now. Each one is described in detail in your player aid, but essentially, goals of this type will score you points based on having influence tokens in the depicted regions on the map. So here, if you have an influence token in regions 1, 3 and 7, that's 6 points. These goals give you points based on your connected regions where you have citizens, but it isn't just as simple as having citizens on the map in those regions, it's the connections between them. For example, with this goal, you need citizens in regions 6 and 7 to get 1 connection, 7 and 1 to get another connection, and 1 and 2 to get another connection. If you have citizens in all of those regions, great. That's all 3 connections and 6 points. But if you only had citizens in regions 6, 7 and 2, that's only 1 connection for 1 point. This type of goal gives you points based on your inventions. Each one works in a different way, so definitely look them up in the player aid. The player with the most ingenuity points wins the game. In case of a tie, the tied player with the most tiles on their progress map wins. And if there's still a tie, the tied player with the most inventions wins. And if there's still a tie, the tied player with the highest population is the winner. Highest population means the fewest citizens left in your supply. And if there's still a tie, play again. I hope you found this video useful in learning how to play Inventions. If you have any questions about the game, please leave them in the comments. And whilst you're there, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel for more content. And as I mentioned earlier, I do rely on the support of my Patreon to keep the channel going. So if you are in a position to be able to do so, please visit patreon.com/gaming rules for exclusive access to the Gaming Rules community and some additional bonus content. Until next time, take care and thanks for watching.